Welcome to the WWE Podcast, the most passionate and authentic wrestling analysis on the web. We've got you covered with every Raw, Smackdown, and NXT show, giving you a no bullshit opinion. We know you love wrestling. We do too. So let's get this show underway.
And that's the bottom line. What? 'Cause Stone Cold said so.
Hey guys, what's going on? And welcome to yet another edition of WWE Rivalries. And it's a very special episode on the day of the WWE Draft. So it's going to be very, very interesting tonight to see what transpires in the WWE Draft. And guys, just going to preface this by saying that if I sound exhausted, it's because I am. I've been doing graveyard shifts all week, and for you guys who have never done graveyard shifts, which are overnight essentially, they're pretty brutal. I'm a city bus driver in Montreal, and I gotta say, it's an alright job, but when you have to work overnight, it could be killer on that body. And, you know, like I started about 6 months ago, just at the beginning of the pandemic, and I've been doing that quite a bit, the overnights, and kind of starting to get to me now. We got to bed around 6 a.m. Woke up early today to record this show, currently 9:45 in the morning. And I mean, I can't complain all that much. I'm kind of used to overnights. When I was in my early 20s, I did a lot of snow removal back in the day. And in Montreal here, and for all you guys in maybe the northeast of the United States, or up here in Canada, or anyone overseas who lives in a colder climate, you know that snow removal can get dicey at times, very on-call work. So if I sound a bit zombie-ish, I'm doing my best here. I got my big cup of coffee to try and wake me up. But if I sound a bit tired at times, that is the reason. So don't hold it against me. I'm doing my best. But no, in all seriousness, very, very excited to get into it today. And in the theme, I guess we could call it, of the draft tonight, I'm doing a very special edition of WWE Rivalries, and that is Raw versus Smackdown in 2005. And I know over the years we've had Raw versus Smackdown, most recently at the consecutive Survivor Series over the last 3 years, or the video games in the late 2000s, or bragging rights pay-per-views in the 2010s. But Raw versus SmackDown in 2005 was a very, very special rivalry, which I am very excited to get into. But before, like I always do, I would just like to touch on a bit of the current product at hand, and not too many thoughts this week on it. But one thing I did want to say was touch a bit on Retribution. I haven't talked a whole lot about them because everything Matt has said basically echoes my feeling on them. And in large part, it has just been apathy for me towards them. And I haven't gotten as riled up as many of you have and as Matt has. But at the same time, I really was starting to get tired of it. But that being said, this whole Mustafa Ali wrinkle really is cool to me and has me a bit intrigued. And I think Mustafa Ali is a guy that, I don't know if he screams heel, but he is much more than the typical goody two-shoe babyface that he has been perceived to be since he came up onto the main roster alongside those types of characters in Apollo Crews and Ricochet and whatnot. So I'm pretty interested to see where they go from there with that. Obviously, on SmackDown, loving the Roman Reigns thing. And not too much to say on SmackDown again, just because all positives. And when it is in large part about positivity on this show, there's not a whole lot to dissect. And all in all, I really like what's going on SmackDown, which kind of makes me sad that they're doing this draft tonight in the format that they are. I was under the impression that they were going to keep the base rosters and draft maybe, I don't know, like 5 to 10 guys apiece over to the opposite brand. But it seems as though they're going back to the drawing board like they did last year. Everyone going into one big pot. One pot for tonight on Smackdown. One pot for Monday on Raw. And I don't hate it, but I don't necessarily like it. And I'll get into that later on. As for what I like about Raw, I really think it's good what they're doing with Murphy and Seth Rollins to pit them against each other and finally give the split. Because, look, it had been a long time coming, I think, for Murphy to turn on Seth. You know, it had been approaching, I guess, 10 months now, if not already there, that Murphy was his disciple and had become his only disciple with the disappearance of Austin Theory going back to NXT, the injury followed by the release of the Authors of Pain. And, you know, if it means them getting away from the Mysterio family and the Power Ranger, then I'm all here for it, because I cannot take another, and I promise I'm not going to go on another full-scale rant like I did a few weeks back, but I cannot take another match involving the Power Ranger, and if you guys don't know, if you're a first-time listener, I refer to Dominic Mysterio as the Power Ranger. I will not refer to him as anything else, so that's all, just a quick heads up there. So I can't stomach another Mysterio Power Ranger versus Murphy and Seth Rollins, or Murphy versus the Power Ranger versus Seth Rollins. I can't do it anymore. If they want to tuck the Power Ranger down the card with Humberto Carrillo in the most vanilla tag team in the history of professional wrestling, so be it. I hope they get their teeth kicked in every single night. But at least that it is somewhat realistic, although I still think he should pay his dues just like everyone else and go back into NXT. Or not even go back, just go to NXT and do his time. Maybe put on a bit of muscle, lift a weight for the first time in his life. Okay, I'm feeling myself getting all heated up. I'm going to run the kibosh on this Power Ranger rant before it even gets started. As for Seth and Buddy Murphy, or just Murphy rather, I'm interested to see where it goes. I would have to assume that they stick on the same show. I'm going to go ahead and assume that they're going to be on Raw, given the whole Monday Night Messiah business. But hey, maybe they throw a curveball and they go to Smackdown. So that's all I really got for the current day product, because I felt like the storylines were almost in a holding pattern this past week. I mean, the Randy Orton thing with Drew, I think they got some heat back on the program. And at least they were building it to a legitimate Hell in a Cell match. And as Matt has talked about so many times, a match that takes place inside the cell has to be worthy of it. And we've seen way too many times in the past few seasons. I got my mind in the hockey game right now. In the past few years in wrestling, or actually going all the way back the past decade for that matter, that they've instilled it into the schedule. They've put the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view in the schedule so that we're just guaranteed to get a match every year, or a couple matches every year. When in reality, you want the Hell in a Cell to be the culmination of a big program. And I always go back to one of the best Hell in a Cell matches I ever saw in my life, and that was Batista versus Triple H inside the cell at Vengeance 2003 to put a bow on their initial rivalry, which was just an incredible match. It was their third run-in in about just as many months, and that is how the Cell should be booked and billed. And I think that they have done a nice job in building Drew and Randy Orton to get there. I'm interested to see what they do. It's going to depend a lot on who gets drafted where tonight, because, again, don't know why they're doing a draft right before pay-per-view with all these storylines up in the air. But in classic WWE fashion, they are just going to bulldoze ahead, common sense to the wayside, and just do as they see please. But to tie it back into the rivalries and why you guys are all here, I want to first give you my opinion on why I think the WWE Draft format tonight is a bad idea and why it ties into this week's episode of Rivalries. I don't like this because while it will give the opportunity to WWE to construct Raw and SmackDown rosters, and I suppose NXT, if they're involved in this, I'm sure they will be in some capacity, to construct rosters, to create new matchups, fresh programs, and whatnot, I don't like it because you're completely abolishing the reasoning behind the brand split. And you may ask, well, the reasoning behind the brand split is competition, and there will be competition between the two brands. Maybe, but I've always thought that more so than internal competition within WWE, it has been because of the distinct identities of the two brands, in which in turn creates competition between viewership. Because if you're getting a certain fix from one brand due to its identity, you may or may not be tuning into the other brand and vice versa. And growing up, I always felt that way. As I went through spurts early in my life where I liked Raw, and then when I approached my teens, I liked SmackDown, and then it kind of flipped after that again. But how do you get identities exclusive to a brand? Stars. And this is the thing that I don't like, that they're throwing every star into one big pot. Because after 1 year of redrafting the rosters, you are going to abolish their identities. Because, yeah, I'm sure there will be a large number of guys who go back to the brand that they were on for the past year. Like, I'm sure that the Hurt Business will stay on Raw, or that Roman Reigns will go back to SmackDown, or examples such as that. But at the same time, you're still going to be flipping over a large portion of the roster. And I think that really hurts in the identity of the two brands. And look, maybe I'm out to lunch, and maybe I'll like the brand new rosters on both sides, and it will create for fresh matchups that will allow for them to do so, as opposed to the classic just draft as where they flip-flop maybe 5 to 10 guys. But I still think that keeping programs and the congruity of these programs and the identity of these two brands is much more important than just making new matchups and fresh programs just for the sake of it. And this is where I'm going to tie it back into the rivalries portion of the show and go back in the time machine to 2005 between Raw and SmackDown. And in 2005, Raw and SmackDown had a draft of their own, but they didn't have it in the classic way that WWE has it now. They had it this year for the first time in a format that a guy once a week on Raw and SmackDown would show up as the draft selection for that week. And it was the first time that they had tried that format, because the year before, in 2004, they had the classic go up to the podium with Paul Heyman as the SmackDown GM and Eric Bischoff as the Raw GM and make multiple selections per night. But the difference was that draft only lasted a week, one Raw, one SmackDown, much like tonight, as opposed to 2005, where it strung on for pretty much the entire month of June. And to this point in 2005, the rosters on Raw and SmackDown had pretty much stayed the same in terms of who the faces of the brands were. You had the initial brand split in 2002. There was no shakeup in 2003. And in 2004, you had the first draft. But even though it was a draft, in 2004, no major player shift. You saw random draftees like Rob Van Dam, the Dudley Boys, and Booker T going over to SmackDown, or Shelton Benjamin and Edge come back over to Raw. And you may say, well, Booker T and Edge and Rob Van Dam are big names, but at this time they were nothing more than upper mid-card guys. Because for the better part of 2 years, the faces of Raw, I should say, were Triple H and Evolution, Shawn Michaels, Kane, maybe Chris Jericho to a lesser extent. And then on SmackDown, you had The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, Big Show, John Cena was an up-and-comer, Eddie Guerrero was starting to get some steam, Brock Lesnar had just left. So Sure, you swapped some quality mid-card guys in 2004, but the faces of the show remain the same. But then you get over to 2005. And 2005 was a year of transition for WWE. Brock Lesnar had just left, and SmackDown had gone through a year of John Bradshaw Layfield as the top heel champion, being challenged by multiple babyface contenders in Eddie Guerrero, Booker T, The Undertaker, and ultimately being conquered by John Cena, becoming the face of that brand. And then over on the Raw side, you had basically, a lot of people refer to it as the reign of terror of Triple H when he was a world heavyweight champion on and off for almost, I would say, 2.5 years, from mid to late 2002 to early 2005. I think he held the title, I would say, my God, 90% of that time, save for a few brief runs by Randy Orton, Goldberg, and Chris Benoit in there. But I think they had kind of exhausted it at that point, with Triple H just constantly at the forefront and at the main event picture on Monday Night Raw. Shawn Michaels and him had a rivalry that pretty much took up all of 2003 and even a bit of 2004. And then eventually they had anointed Batista as the top babyface, going over on Triple H at WrestleMania 21, winning the World Heavyweight Championship. And then even at this time, Randy Orton was kind of lingering in the background. He had a short babyface run in late 2004, turned heel to face The Undertaker at WrestleMania 21 in 05. And you kind of started seeing the ushering in of a new era with the likes of John Cena, Batista, and Randy Orton. And to paint a picture, when I was watching at this time, obviously as time has gone on, it has changed quite drastically. But at this time, I always kind of pictured Batista and Cena were the new Rock and Austin, and Randy Orton was the new Triple H. And not to say that Randy Orton took a backseat to Batista and John Cena, or Triple H did the same to Rock and Austin, but Orton had emerged as a top heel. They tried him as a babyface, and it just didn't work. And as we see today, Randy Orton is tailor-made to be a heel. So that's why I think he kind of took a backseat to Batista and Cena, much like Triple H did to Rock and Austin in this time, because at the end of the day, the baby faces are always going to be at the forefront of the company in terms of marketing and pushing and what have you. So by the time June 2005 had rolled around, WWE had set the stage for yet another draft. And again, I was expecting the whole go up to the podium, make a selection, this, that, and the other thing. But it actually opened with Chris Jericho's highlight reel waiting for Raw's first selection to come out to the ring. And while I thought, yeah, it's for sure going to be a big name, like, who knows, maybe Eddie Guerrero's going to come over, or Rey Mysterio from Smackdown, WWE had something else planned in mind.
Pick of the draft lottery, come on down!
Who is it? Who is it? Is it a he or a she?
Come on out!
Well, whoever it is, they're late. Is there really somebody?
So as you hear, John Cena, the WWE champion, gets drafted to Raw with the championship belt. And this was just a crazy, crazy thing for so many levels. Well, for one, John Cena, the biggest star on SmackDown, coming over to Monday Night Raw. But even much more so, it had been the first time that a belt, or a champion rather, had been drafted. And it had almost been like an unwritten rule that champions stayed on their specific brands. And you got to remember, 2005 or June 2005, the WWE Championship had been exclusive to SmackDown for near 3 years at this point, even more than 2 years. And it was just crazy to see the WWE Champion over on Monday Night Raw. And it really, really made you realize that, man, they are going to make a massive shakeup in this draft. But as I said, it wasn't just a one and done or a 1 week thing as it is nowadays. This one lasted a few weeks that strung on. The initial draft pick that started with John Cena was June 6th, and it culminated June 30th. So you had 4 weeks worth of draft picks to get through, and only 1 pick per show, except for the final week that each show would get 2 picks. So obviously the first Raw, John Cena goes. Then on SmackDown, Chris Benoit goes back there. The following Monday night, Kurt Angle gets drafted to Raw. That was a big one because he had been on SmackDown since the beginning of the draft or beginning of the brand split. So it had been 3 years since we saw Kurt Angle on Monday Night Raw. SmackDown gets Randy Orton. So these are pretty monumental pieces going around. It's not like the year before where you're throwing around mid-card guys and splitting up tag teams. No, these are big names. And I think Kurt Angle was a big one because he was an Attitude Era guy that had been exclusive to SmackDown for just so long. And he had been there since the beginning. And you could make that case for Benoit too. But Benoit had started on SmackDown, jumped to Raw following the Rumble in 2004, and now was going back. Now we're going to get to see Randy Orton for the first time on SmackDown in 3 years. The following Raw, Carlito goes, and then on the following Thursday, SmackDown gets Muhammad Hassan. And these are, I guess, less popular names, but these were 2 heels that were getting pushed and I guess needed a fresh start. And I know Matt had just did a Wrestling Nostalgia and Muhammad Hassan not too long ago. But Carlito and Hassan at this time were being pushed as 2 young heels in the mid-card. And I fully thought that at this time they were planning to give them each main event pushes. So swapping these 2 up-and-coming mid-card heels was a nice wrinkle in the whole part of the draft. The final week on Monday Night Raw, you get Big Show and Rob Van Dam coming over. And again, Big Show, similar to Kurt Angle, we had not seen Big Show on Monday Night Raw since the beginning of this brand split. It had been, I think it had been almost 3 years since we had seen him on Monday Night Raw. And again, another Attitude Era guy. So that was huge. Rob Van Dam coming back over to Raw from SmackDown. He had been drafted to SmackDown the year before. Rob Van Dam at this time, it was very bizarre what was going on with him. I think he had injury issues, personal issues, but he was always on the cusp of a main eventer, and they kept like switching him back and forth between the brands, I think, to try and just give him the right avenue to get there, but just never seemed to catch on, besides when he won the WWE Championship at the ECW One Night Stand, but that only lasted a month. But I always felt that Rob Van Dam, for one way or another, just could not realize that potential that he had and the oozing charisma. The crowd loved him. But nonetheless, a big, big final 2 draft picks for Raw. And then June 30th, you get Christian going over to SmackDown to open the show. But during this time, you have to remember, SmackDown did not have a world champion. The WWE champion, John Cena, and the World Heavyweight Champion, Batista, were both over on Raw. And they had just main evented the Monday Night Raw pay-per-view on June 26th, the Sunday before the culmination of the draft. And it was the first time ever that a pay-per-view not named Survivor Series, WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, or SummerSlam, that both the WWE and World Heavyweight Championship were defended at a Raw exclusive pay-per-view. Because at this time, these were two separate entities. I know WWE tried it again in late 2016 all the way to early 2018, having the brand exclusive pay-per-views. I kind of like that idea because it really showed off the two brands as their own worlds. Obviously, they've gone back to each pay-per-view being dual branded, but it was a cool aspect that made you once again have almost brand loyalty and made you want to watch one more so than the other. But like I said, Vengeance 2005 was the first ever non-Big Four pay-per-view that had both championships fought on it. So you get to SmackDown, and Teddy Long has introduced a 6-man match that's going to main event the show to crown a new SmackDown World Champion. And this match featured JBL, Muhammad Hassan, Christian, The Undertaker, Booker T, and Chris Benoit. And as you could imagine, John Bradshaw Layfield, who was on his best heel run, had been for about a year at this point, came out on top in a very hook and crook way. So John Bradshaw Layfield wins the 6-man elimination match, and out comes Teddy Long to award him as this new SmackDown World Champion. But instead of awarding him the newly created World Championship, Teddy Long has another message for John Bradshaw Layfield.
There it is. Let's see that, man. I want to see that title since last week. JBL, I've got some good news, and I've got some bad news for you, player. What? Now, the bad news is, even though you won the match, you are not the Smackdown champion. What? What the hell? You know something, player? Recently, I found out that there's no need for a Smackdown championship. Now, the good news is that you have earned the right to be the new number 1 contender to this man. Now, ladies and gentlemen, everybody get ready to show your love for the final draft lottery pick and world champion, Batista! What the hell? Oh, my! Is this a joke? What the hell's going on here? No, it's not a joke. He's the latest draft lottery. Where is he? I'll see it when I believe it. Oh, my God, I believe it. Holy, I hope this is great. Smackdown has hit the jackpot. Holy cow! The World Heavyweight Champion has come to SmackDown! Oh my God! Batista! I can't believe it! Batista! The World Heavyweight Champion of SmackDown! This is the man who 4 nights ago beat Triple H in Hell in a Cell! This is the man who 3 times beat Triple H! This is the man who won the title at WrestleMania, and Batista is on SmackDown! Shocking!
So as you hear, Batista, the World Heavyweight Champion, goes to SmackDown as the final draft lottery pick, and was it predictable? Yeah, kind of, but as Matt always says, predictability isn't a bad thing if it's the right thing to do, and this was a perfect case of it, as there was no point to create another SmackDown champion, and at the end of the day, you knew the world champion was probably going to get sent over to SmackDown, but they made you wait a bit. You know, this was a 4-week-long program that they drawed out with the draft lottery. And, you know, it started on Monday Night Raw, and it culminated on Thursday. I think it was Thursday Night SmackDown at this time. I get so confused with SmackDown, going from Thursday to Friday to Tuesday back to Friday and all that nonsense. But, so yeah, you have the stage set at the end of June 2005 with the new look rosters. And you have John Cena, Kurt Angle, Chris Jericho, Triple H, Shawn Michaels on Raw, and then you have Batista, Randy Orton, John Bradshaw, Layfield, and The Undertaker and Eddie Guerrero over on SmackDown. And this brings us all the way to October 2005. And what happens in October 2005 is Raw has a Raw Homecoming, which is one of these classic Raw festival nights or event nights, or like a Raw 25 or a Raw 1000 or season opener. For whatever reason, it was called Homecoming this week. And on this Homecoming, SmackDown had their own match, which was a 6-man tag team match. And again, it was cool to see, because it wasn't like nowadays where it's just commonplace to see a SmackDown guy show up on Raw and vice versa via the quarterly invitational or the wild card rule or all that nonsense that WWE just throws our way to make sense of them not abiding by the brand split. This was a legitimate reason because it was an event. And it was cool because, again, you had not ever seen crossover between the two brands. So when it happened, it was a massive deal. But during this match, or actually before this match even got started, Eric Bischoff comes out and says, "I don't want this SmackDown garbage on my show." And he turns out the lights on SmackDown, which was pretty cool because you knew something was gonna come from this. Something was up. And Eric Bischoff, I've said it before, I'll say it again, he was just a master at being the on-screen heel authority figure. And maybe that's why I have a soft place in my heart for a heel authority figure, because I'm always just hoping that a guy as good as Eric Bischoff back during this time comes around. But I don't think we'll ever be as lucky as we were in the Ruthless Aggression era with Bischoff running the show on Monday Night Raw. But this sets into place a slow-burning rivalry between Raw and SmackDown, because later that night, John Cena and Kurt Angle, two Raw superstars brawling in the ring as they were in the middle of a program, get ambushed by the SmackDown roster who wanted to even the odds, and as Teddy Long said that they were embarrassed and made them look like fools. And this culminates in a brawl between the two rosters to close out this Monday Night Raw. So over the next proceeding couple of weeks, you slowly start to see the stage set building towards a match at Survivor Series 2005. And again, this wasn't the classic Survivor Series of the past few years where the season rolls around and then it just happens. No. This wasn't force-fed to us. This was an organic build, and it was the first time they had ever done this. The first time they had ever done a Raw versus SmackDown 5-on-5 elimination match. Before that, they were all just 5-on-5 elimination matches within their own brands. So it wasn't like today where the calendar turns to November and you know that there's going to be brand loyalty involved because, it's just that time of year. No, there was brand loyalty involved because WWE actually did a very good job of building their storyline to get to this point. And like I said, you could believe why these guys were loyal to their brands because of the shakeup that had just happened 4 months prior with big name superstars going to SmackDown and vice versa. So they wanted to prove that their brand had made the right decision in getting their guys, in getting them and acquiring them. So I guess nowadays it's hard to justify that because there's just so much fluctuation between the rosters, and you're lucky if one guy sticks on Raw or SmackDown for more than 1 year at a time before WWE gets their hand in there and instills a wild card rule or ships up the rosters or turns them upside down again. But at this time, it was really a thing where if you got put onto a brand at a draft, you were likely going to be there for several years at a bare minimum. And for guys like Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker, they never changed. I did not see The Undertaker on Monday Night Raw until, I want to say, 2011 when he started his program with Triple H. Now, bear in mind, I didn't really watch WWE a whole lot from 2008 to 2011. But during the Ruthless Aggression era, there were just some guys that you never saw on the opposite brand. I never saw Undertaker on Monday Night Raw. I never saw Shawn Michaels on SmackDown, besides when he attacked Kurt Angle building to their match at WrestleMania 21. Kane was a guy who was never on SmackDown, but finally transferred there in, I believe, late 2006 after a 4-year run on Monday Night Raw. Eddie Guerrero as well. He was on SmackDown for the entirety up until his tragic death, which actually happened during this program. But these were things that WWE did to make the fans believe why the wrestlers cared about brand loyalty, because they were literally on this brand for years and years and years at a time, and the brands were billed as separate entities. And you can't have a brand split if you're going to break it every couple of months with some made-up rule just to justify getting a guy over onto Raw or SmackDown for that 1 week. It doesn't work. And the brand split is one of my favorite things WWE has ever done, but I've always said, if you're not going to abide by it strictly and wholeheartedly, you might as well not do it. Because number one, it devalues the entire concept of it. Number two, it devalues the brand loyalty aspect from it. And number three, it devalues the championships. Because what the hell is the point of having two world champions if they could go on either show? And we saw that in the early 2010s, that the World Heavyweight Championship became just a glorified mid-card title. And just to think back to how big of a deal that world title was in 2005 when Batista switched over to SmackDown, to where it ended up before it just became, I guess, unified with the WWE Championship and virtually just thrown to the wayside. It's an absolute catastrophe. And you've seen it with the United States Championship. In the 2010s, when they abolished the brand split, but they had the Intercontinental and the U.S. title showing up on the same show, automatically the Intercontinental Championship surpassed it as the better mid-card title. And you saw the U.S. title almost just as a throwaway title, much like the European Championship was in its final days. And 2 tag team champions now and 2 women's championships now. It's just, if you're not going to abide by it wholeheartedly, then you might as well not have it. And you got to cut championships and whatnot. But you guys get the point. So to get back on track, they start building towards a 5-on-5 match for Survivor Series between Raw's best and SmackDown's best. So on the Raw side, you have it led by Shawn Michaels, Big Show, Kane, Carlito, and Chris Masters. And on the SmackDown side, you have it led by World Heavyweight Champion Batista, Randy Orton, JBL, an up-and-coming Bobby Lashley, who had just been around for about 6 months at this point, and Rey Mysterio. And as I mentioned before, during this program, Eddie Guerrero tragically passed away. And his final match was actually a qualifying match to be a part of Team SmackDown, which he won against Mr. Kennedy, which Matt, I believe, has already recapped in a Wrestling Nostalgia. And obviously they put this whole program on hold for about 1 or 2 weeks to mourn the loss of Eddie Guerrero. And he was ultimately replaced on SmackDown, on Team SmackDown, by Randy Orton. And I won't get too much into the loss of Eddie Guerrero because that's just a whole episode in and of itself. So WWE pushes on with the 5-on-5 match scheduled for Survivor Series 2005. And one thing I always kind of found weird is that, you know, you had Batista and JBL and Randy Orton on Team SmackDown, but arguably the 2 biggest stars on Raw at this time being Kurt Angle and John Cena, who were in their own program for the WWE Championship, were not part of Team Raw and not really part of this program whatsoever. And I always kind of found that a bit bizarre. I would have liked to see, you know, John Cena lead a team versus Batista with both world titles in the picture. But for whatever reason, they pushed on with Shawn Michaels leading Team Monday Night Raw against Batista's Team SmackDown. And I found it really cool what they did leading up to this, as they had one Monday Night Raw where SmackDown showed up and invaded Monday Night Raw, and they had the parking lot brawl where Batista got double chokeslammed through the windshield of a car, and I thought that was a pretty cool segment of them brawling in the parking lot and whatnot in their suits and what have you. And this continued on with the invasion of the opposite brands. And I remember on one SmackDown, Edge was sent over by Eric Bischoff to face Batista in a match because he had said that you weren't loyal to the Raw brand and you should go over there and fight for us. But then it turned out to be a setup where they had Chris Masters and Carlito attack Theodore Long backstage. A bunch of the SmackDown guys ran off after them to chase them down in a car, in the likes of Matt Hardy and Bobby Lashley and JBL. And while all these SmackDown guys were dealing with the Raw intruders backstage, Edge set up Batista to be ambushed by Kane and the Big Show in the ring. And all the likes that were left for SmackDown backstage were a bunch of cruiserweights who tried to come out and help Batista to no avail. And Batista and Big Show and Kane, rather, put the hurting on the World Heavyweight Champion Batista. And this was a trend that they really stuck with throughout this program, is that at any moment possible, Kane and Big Show would isolate Batista and just beat the holy hell out of him, usually culminating in a double chokeslam through the nearest object. And like I said before, in the weeks before this, there had been a chokeslam through the windshield. This was a beatdown on SmackDown in the ring. So this finally builds up to the go-home show on SmackDown. And what happens is that they have a World Heavyweight Championship match between Randy Orton and Batista. But like I said, Batista was really banged up from the weeks of abuse from Kane and Big Show as they were building this program. So there were numerous Raw invasions throughout this final show leading up to Survivor Series. So in the main event, Theodore Long, the SmackDown general manager, has every single SmackDown superstar stand outside the ring, completely surrounded, while Batista and Randy Orton have their match for the World Heavyweight Championship. And Batista was all bandaged up here, completely covered around his shoulders and his upper torso. But before this match could even get 5 minutes underway, the Raw roster made its presence felt.
This is something simple as a collar and elbow tie-up. Makes Batista stretch his arm out and stretches his ribbon. And his injury's out. Think about it. He's been chokeslammed in the ring. He's been chokeslammed through a car. Batista's been through the ringer. And there you see Batista. In pain, Cole. But he's not going to make an excuse for it. If he was, he'd try to beg out of this matchup. He did not do that. The champion ready to go. But that speaks the type of competitor that Batista is. Randy Orton is also a great competitor. He realizes Batista's less than 100%. Orton realizes this could be his night. What the hell? Whoa. Wait a minute. That's wrong. The Raw superstars are doing it. Here we go. Here we go. Oh, hell is fucking it's a fight. A big fight. Here we go, baby. Come on. SmackDown. Shawn Michaels are in it. Orton's in it as well. Raw and SmackDown beating the holy hell out of each other. It's just a fight in the alleyway here. A big fight now. Murdoch and Kane have singled out Randy Orton in the ring. Wait a minute. Whoa. Come on, Randy. Nail it. Sweet chin music. Payback. Get it right. Yeah. Stereo. I've seen it some time. Uh-oh. HBK. Bam. The arena has come unglued. Watch your back, Ray. And Carlito. Oh, and a swinging neck breaker. And game. Come on, Batista, suck it up. Drive him. Watch it back. Big Show from behind. The numbers game catching up to the champion. And our SmackDown superstars don't realize what's going on, Taz. Oh, they're in a fight outside the ring. It's a fight all in the alley there. Batista is in trouble. He's right out in front of us here. He's been turned off from the others by Big Show and Kane. These two gigantic. Kane and Big. Oh my God. Kane, how do you do it? Get out of here. Get the hell out of here. The hell out of here. JBL trying to help out. Trying to save Batista. And Kane is trying to. No. Stop this. No. Stop this. He's hard. Help. No. Damn it. He's hard. Oh my God. Our champion has been left playing. Oh my God. Look at the sick look on their faces. Damn it. Come on, SmackDown and Raw going at the ring at the same time. Batista, our champion, is breaking down in the ring.
So as you guys heard, in the midst of a massive brawl that involved probably 20 guys at least from each SmackDown and Raw, Big Show and Kane once again find a way to isolate Batista and chokeslam him through the announce table. And the Raw Tag Team Champions, Big Show and Kane, had just made it a point that every single chance they get, they would isolate the World Heavyweight Champ Batista and chokeslam him through the nearest possible object. And one part about this little segment here that I found really cool and really drove home the fact of how well WWE had built the whole narrative around the brand loyalty was while they were isolating Batista outside the ring and beating him up and Big Show and King were preparing to chokeslam him through the announce table, JBL came running across the ring, desperately trying to help Batista and save him, but was obviously halted by Shelton Benjamin and numerous other Raw guys. And I found that really cool, and I do to this day, because JBL for a year and a half was arguably the most hated heel in the company and the biggest dirtbag in the company, and had just come off of a multi-month program with Batista. But to see him want to help his brand member so bad in almost a babyface type of way really kind of drove home how much WWE was pushing the brand loyalty aspect of this program. And it's not like nowadays, like I said, where the calendar turns to November and now everyone cares about their brand more than anything else in wrestling. But this was literally done over a 2-month build, and so well done, and it was done for the first time ever that it made it realistic and you made it buy in. And JBL was a guy throughout this program that he almost kind of turned babyface for a month. And obviously, as soon as Survivor Series came and went, he was back to his heel tactics and his scumbag ways. But there were several times throughout this program where I found JBL had a lot of babyface acts. Like I mentioned before, when SmackDown went over to Raw and had the parking lot brawl and Batista was chokeslammed through the car, JBL challenged any Raw member that night, ultimately ending up being Shawn Michaels, to avenge his World Heavyweight Champion because he cared so much about the SmackDown brand. And I know, again, nowadays we'll hear guys talk about that, but back then, because maybe it was the first of its kind ever doing a SmackDown versus Raw type of program, I really felt like it was well done, and seeing a heel guy like JBL put everything else on the back burner and care about SmackDown, I found it a really cool aspect of this entire angle. So you go into Survivor Series, SmackDown versus Raw, and I already mapped out the teams, but there were a few guys here who were getting the rub as up-and-comers and being able to work with legitimate legends. And I think the biggest names in that regard were Carlito and Chris Masters on the Raw side, and Bobby Lashley, and I suppose you could throw Rey Mysterio into that mix as well, because he had been around WWE for about 3 years at this point, but this was the first time that he was really dipping his toe into the main event picture. And they were in the ring with the likes of HBK and Batista, Big Show, Kane, JBL, Randy Orton. And this was a very good match. I really liked this match. One of my favorite 5-on-5 matches ever at a Survivor Series. And I would really recommend you guys go watch it. And what I liked about it is that it wasn't predictable. The guys you expected to go to the end didn't go all the way to the end. As you know, Bobby Lashley went out first. Batista went out second for SmackDown. Kane was the first one out for Raw. So they were really kind of mixing it up with big names going out early in the match. And it actually ended with Shawn Michaels as the lone guy left against JBL, Rey Mysterio, and Randy Orton. And it was kind of weird because building to this match, Raw was kind of billed as the heel team and SmackDown as the babyface team. And maybe it was because Raw was led by Bischoff, who was a heel, and SmackDown had Teddy Long, who was a babyface, or because Batista constantly kept getting, smashed through tables and cars, and he was the top babyface in the company at this point, maybe rivaled by John Cena, and Kane and Big Show were acting in heelish ways. But it just seemed as though Raw was the heel team. But then you get to this point in the match, and even though Raw was the heel team and Shawn Michaels had his fair share of heel tactics and had just come off of a heel match against Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam 2005, where he had gone full-blown heel for pretty much 2 months during that program, he was always a babyface deep down at heart, especially when he returned in 2002. And you kind of saw it seeping through here. And I just found the psychology WWE booked this match with brilliant. Because like I said, you go in with the predetermined notion that Raw's the heel team, but then they book it in a way where you kind of want to cheer for HBK and for Raw to go over. So HBK is getting beaten down here, and Rey Mysterio goes for a springboard seated senton, but gets caught in midair by Sweet Chin Music. He gets eliminated. Then JBL goes for a clothesline from hell. HBK ducks it. Sweet Chin Music. He's eliminated. And at this point, it's almost like deja vu from 2003 to Survivor Series, when HBK was leading Team Austin, went down 3-1 against Orton, Jericho, and Christian, and it came down to him versus Orton after he took out Jericho and Christian. But lo and behold, we do see the deja vu completed with Randy Orton eliminating Shawn Michaels to get the win for Team SmackDown. And this was the third year in a row that Randy Orton was the sole survivor of his team. And once again, in a heel way after being a babyface the year prior at 2004. So to put a bow on this entire program, I just think the reason I did it was because in the spirit of the draft, and with the draft being today, WWE should take a page out of their own book back in 2005 and let stars become linked to their specific brand. Let brands develop their own identity through the stars and through the championships and through the programs, and don't just throw it in the blender every October just for the sake of new matchups. I like new matchups. I think it's important to shake it up once a year or even every 1.5 years. Not all the time, but do so with mid-card guys. Maybe throw the odd main event guy over here and there like they did in 2005. But for the most part, you gotta let things settle and you gotta let things develop organically. You can't just throw stuff at the wall and hope it sticks in the effort just to get new matchups and draw ratings and this, that, and the other thing. And their program between Raw and SmackDown in 2005 was a great example of that, because you saw how brilliant the psychology was and just letting the fans choose which brand do you like more. Because, like I said, in large part, Raw was billed as the heel team leading up to this 5-on-5 match. But then when the match got going, slowly but surely, you're cheering for Raw because how can you root against Shawn Michaels? There were heels and baby faces on either side of the teams. You know, Carlito and Chris Masters were two of the most hated guys, while they were both over at this time too. But they were two of the most hated guys on Team Raw. Ditto, and they were teaming with HBK, who was one of the most beloved guys, and it's ditto on SmackDown as well. Two hated heels in Randy Orton and JBL teaming with beloved baby faces Rey Mysterio and Batista, and a young up-and-coming babyface in Bobby Lashley. JBL acting like a babyface. Big Show and Kane acting like heels after being babyfaces for a lot of 2005. It was just a really cool dynamic, and it worked so well. And it was the true spirit of the brand split, which was not determining which show was going to get the better guys, but rather determining which show the fans liked more. And I just thought it was a great program, one of the best Raw vs. SmackDown angles they've ever done, more so than bragging rights, more so than any of the past Survivor Series since 2016. This is the way you do it, and you don't do it every year. This was the first time they had done a program like this of Raw versus SmackDown ever, because the initial brand split happened in 2002. They didn't cross paths at all until this program in 2005. This is how you do it. Don't make these guys cross over for 2-3 years and then watch the amount of popularity an angle will get. And the proof is in the pudding. This angle was popular not just because it was Raw versus SmackDown. It was popular because you had never seen this type of program before. You had never seen Raw and SmackDown get pitted against each other before. You had never seen baby faces and heels fight alongside each other in the name of the brand. And like I said so many times throughout this show, it was believable because of the way they built it. And it wasn't just because the calendar turned to November. You believed it because it was organic and built through congruity in the storylines. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this show. I know I rambled a bit. I hope you enjoyed the clips, but all in all, I thought it was a much-needed show, especially in light of the draft taking place tonight, on Friday, and on Monday Night Raw. And I know Matt has an episode dropping tonight to review SmackDown and the draft immediately following, almost like a live review, so that's going to be cool. Keep an eye out for that. And look, if you want to get in touch with me, as always, at ADamarco25, you can email Matt at Real WWE Podcast with any questions. I'd be happy to answer them. If you want to leave a voicemail for me as well, I'm sure Matt would have no problem relaying it to me. Do that as well. But look, guys, I hope I hear from you. I hope you enjoyed today's show, and I will talk to you next week.